Welcome, everyone. This is our session on salary negotiation. So all of this is due to all your great feedback and input. We put out a survey on career transition earlier this month, and we asked y'all, hey, what are the biggest challenges you're facing as you're transitioning either out of the military or even, between your different career fields? So with that, the biggest response we've gotten was didn't know what industry or profession to transition to. That was the number one. Number two, right on its heels, was salary negotiation. And number three was networking. So the chapter is kind of taking that on and making sure that you have the skills and the resources you need to do that. So we have an entire section on how to where you introduce you into different career fields. But tonight we're going to focus on number two, which is salary negotiation. And great session we have planned for you guys tonight. With me is co-hosting with me. So first, I guess introduce myself. I'm your president for USNA GWC, Luis Martinez, class of 2001. And with me, I've got my fellow classmate there, Ingrid, which I see some of you already recognize, also class of 2001, obviously. And our guest for tonight, Erica Schreiner. And I'll pass off and have a quick bio for them, or let them introduce themselves real fast. But Ingrid.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here tonight. Go @1. Woo. So anyway, I'm really happy to share insights. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on this by any means. I was actually just jotting down a few notes. And I've really only negotiated salary and done this sort of thing a couple times. So I got out of the Navy in 2009 and started a consulting job. Was doing that for about 3 years, and then now I'm currently with Guidehouse Consulting, and I've been with them for the last 8 years. So I will certainly share those insights, but again, it's not like I've switched jobs every year or something like that. But yeah, great to be here.
And I said for Erica, I like to do thanks, Ingrid. I'll do as our guest a proper introduction. So Erica's we met Erica maybe a year ago now. I think it's been that long, and she has been an absolute phenomenal resource for the chapter. The topic we're talking about tonight is really focused on anyone that's not just military, but anyone that's out there trying to get their fair compensation for their skill set as they talk with a company or trying to get a raise. And Erica is a director with FedSoft. I met her about a year ago, and since that time, it's been absolutely amazing to have her. She's helped so many of our chapter members just get good positions here in the general DC area. I mean, just very, very good go-getter, always out trying to help us. So we proposed this, and she jumped all over. She has a phenomenal presentation for us tonight. A lot of experience in this field to help guide us on how to make sure you're paid appropriately. And and not to steal her thunder too much, but when we talk salary tonight, one thing that I definitely want you to is keep asking questions. Like I said, it's great to have someone like Erica tonight, but really focus more on compensation. And some of you may not, we've got a couple of guys that are probably still active duty that probably aren't thinking that way. They're thinking more of just the salary, the dollar amount that's hitting their bank account. But you'll see that we're going to talk on just the full spectrum of just compensation. And what we talk about tonight is applicable to, we're going to focus more like private sector, however it's applicable across any type of negotiation that you do. So with that, Erica.
Thank you. I actually met Luis because I tried to recruit him, but the distance was too far for him. And then upon further discussion, we realized that there were some commonalities, especially with transitioning military, and just struggles across the board. So I'm going to start the presentation. And then if anybody has any comments, just let me know. If anything seems like, God, this is so dumb, I know all of this, then write it in the chat. I'm open to everything. Okay.
Okay. And while you're going with that, Erica, I'll be moderating in the background, and I'm going to shoot out a poll real fast, just get a feeler for who's out there. We've got 4 polls for you tonight, just kind of like interactive thing, but it'll help us just kind of frame the conversation, because that's what this is tonight. It's not just us giving a presentation to you, but it's we want to hear your questions and give you a platform to get the answers you're looking for.
So Luis had asked me to put together a definition of terms because we weren't sure where everyone's scope of knowledge was. Staffing recruiters who work within an agency like myself, either managed services or your traditional staffing agency focusing on a particular vertical, and with recruiters focusing on particular skill sets. Contract to hire, having a vested interest in getting you the most money, both with staffing recruiters in general, mostly because their commission is dependent upon how much money they get you for salary. So you can be more creative with negotiation. So limited benefits, full benefits, 1099. And when I say limited benefits, I mean, if you don't need medical, dental, or vision, because it's a staffing company and they're used to 6, 9, or 12 months contract to hire, their insurance costs are going to be a lot more and those burden rates are a lot higher. So you can always say, look, I don't need medical, dental, or vision, and they'll raise your hourly rate, sometimes by $3 or $4. And then there's 1099. Most of them won't do a true 1099 contractor. You have to have your own LLC just for insurance purposes. Believe it or not, you run into a lot of people who do that because they don't want to pay their taxes. So obviously the end goal for contract to hire is to become a full-time employee of the contract or the end client that you're going to, with the hope of converting. And then direct hire can either be done through an agency or direct with the corporation/company. So that's always an important question to ask a recruiter when you get a phone call is this a direct hire or contract to hire? Because sometimes they can act as a liaison. For government contracting, you are limited by the stipulations of the contract or the bid. It's important to ask whether or not it is pre-bid or post-bid. If they ask you to sign a letter of intent, those are not necessarily legally binding. It's just there for the task order RFP or the RFP to, let the government know that you intend to represent them. And the reason that I say it's not legally binding is because if they contact you post-award and say, hey, we won the bid, but your salary has to go down by $20,000, you're not bound to accept that. Talent acquisition, being internal to corporate recruiting, they have a different mentality than necessarily staffing recruiters, because working for the corporation, they have more of that you should want to work for us kind of mentality. And it's, we'll get into that later on about how that can change your negotiation. And that's your traditional negotiate after the fact. And then the hiring manager would be the one who controls the budget and typically works with talent acquisition, with acquisition being the liaison. This is more than likely the person that you report to. So HR or talent acquisition will control the pay bands, and the manager will control whether or not they're willing to go outside those pay bands to bring you on, typically.
Now, Erica, how would someone know who they're talking to when they are, I guess, talking from a company? How do they know that when you're talking to a staffing recruiter or a talent acquisition person or a hiring manager?
Hiring managers will almost never call a candidate until it gets to the interview stage. But talent acquisition, if it's a major corporation, you'll know because they'll say what company they're from. If it sounds like a mom and pop, or, if it's drawing like Tech Systems or Insight Global or Experis, and you hear from any of those big companies, it's a staffing recruiter.
Okay. And so is a good way to think of a staffing recruiter, I guess the like a headhunter, is that a, I guess,
yeah, we hate that term, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
So I started off with pre-hire negotiation. I think the first step would be on your job search to create an evaluation checklist, do some research on the company, look up. Certain companies have a reputation for paying lower or, having really good benefits or great working conditions. My last company prior to this, we had cornhole and basketball all around. And they even had an Xbox for when you get bored, or they would have like a puzzle room. That seems to be a new thing, which crosses over into culture as well, because they realize that not everybody wants to sit in front of a desk for 6 or 7 hours a day and remain focused the entire time. So if that's important to you, it's something to take into consideration. Commute. I've always said before that recruiting is like a tripod. The job duties, the commute, and the money all have to make sense. Otherwise, 6 months from now, you're going to be looking for another job. And then programs and policies. Do they allow remote work? How flexible are they when I have kids? Because some companies are not that flexible. So next one is make them give you the first offer. 1, you don't want to exclude yourself from consideration. And 2, you put yourself in a greater position to counteroffer when you let them set the bar. Otherwise, if you ask for too much, then your resume may never make it through from either the staffing recruiter or talent acquisition, or the hiring manager might be turned off because they're like, that's $15,000 outside of my budget. And then if you jump right to pay, most employers will assume that the money is more important than the work if you make that your primary focus. And then always negotiate. So get the offer in writing first, because that's going to lay out the benefits, the PTO package, the 401k contribution, which we'll get into later, which you can actually use to help you. But if you accept the verbal offer over the phone, sometimes you don't exactly know what you're signing up for. So you can ask, can I see a copy of the benefits? Can I see a copy of this? And at that point, because you've made an offer, then they'll more than likely pass it on to you. Some companies are weird about that, but most of them are pretty good. Don't do it in piecemeal. And the reason that I put some of these down is because I've had this happen. I can't tell you how many times. The candidate that you call, who obviously the employer wants you to start quickly, and negotiating serially is always bad. I've seen hiring managers pull offers because of this, because it's exhausting for everyone involved. So, were you going to say something, Louise?
Oh yeah, I guess no. It was what do you mean by negotiating serially, or like piecemeal?
So if you ask for a salary increase and they concede, and then you ask for remote work during the next call, and then they give you that, and then during, you send out another email and say, oh wait, but actually I just realized that I wanted extra PTO. Then people are going to be like, oh my God, is it ever going to be enough? If we give him everything, when is he going to say, you know what, I'm good and I'm going to accept?
Got it.
Be present. So as far as that, like bartering, if you're already at the top end of the salary cap and they let you know that when you've received the offer, don't for 5K more or additional PTO. It can look unprofessional and put a bad taste in their mouth. And already from the get-go, you've let them know that you're going to be a pain in the ass. Ask for time to consider the offer. It makes sense. You don't necessarily need to negotiate every aspect of the job, and especially not over email. Pick 2 or 3 items on that checklist that I talked about earlier to discuss which items are most important to you. And ask to do it virtually, especially during times like COVID, rather than doing it over the phone when things can get lost in translation. But at least give them a set time. If it's a Tuesday, say, I'd like to think this over. Can I get back to you on Friday? Expressing value without arrogance or showboating.
There's no problem there with Academy grads.
So everybody's worked with that person who believes that the company or the department will crumble if they leave, or that project would have been over budget or late had you not saved it. So I know that there's people who are laughing right now. If you walk out of an interview and feel like everything was flowing and you were on top of your A game, that's going to translate into a smoother salary negotiation because it creates a vibe of confidence. But at the same time, don't hide it. If you're a naturally modest person and, normally you would undervalue your accomplishments, don't be afraid to express everything you've accomplished. The employer obviously likes you if they're making you an offer, and believes that you'd be a value add to the company.
Have you seen that to be a very common obstacle as you're working with, I guess, candidates like us? Is that they don't sell themselves forcefully enough?
Sometimes.
Forcefully, I say that. Yeah. Okay.
I think the struggle for that would actually be translating your military accomplishments into relevant civilian tasks.
Okay.
And then creating leverage and asking for more than you expect. So it's the scarcity model. The more companies that you have that are interested in you, the more companies will be interested in you. You are the finite resource. So asking for more than you expect leaves room for concessions. And people love to split the difference because it seems fair. But there's also a fine line between that and greed. So the 20-10 rule, asking for 20% more than their first offer, but accepting no less than 10% more. Keep in mind also when you get into higher level salary, sometimes this can be large figures, but as a rule of thumb, just keep it reasonable, but you should always negotiate. And then factoring in benefits once you've received an offer. It's not discrimination to let them know that their benefits are expensive, and that's why you're asking for additional compensation after you've received the offer. So if you do some research on cost, how long it takes for their benefits to kick in, what's the deductible going to be like, what's the plan type? And by plan type, I mean, is it Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, is it United? Or I'm sorry, not the plan type, the provider, but the plan type meaning like an HMO, PPO, EPO, and so on and so forth. And then additional compensation outside of salary. So paid time off, which some states also have laws, like Maryland does, where you have to accrue sick time, regardless of whatever the PTO package is. Other states, you can lump in your sick time and your paid time off into one bucket, and however you use it, then that's it. Some companies also have a use it or lose it policy where, if you get 3 weeks off, they expect you to use that by December 31st. Otherwise, next year you lose all of that time. Some companies will pay you out for it. Restricted stock units. Amazon's really big on this. So company stock over a specific vesting period, it's typically 4 to 5 years. And some of them even have it set where the first year you can't collect on your vesting, which prevents people from staying a year, cashing out on a big paycheck, and then leaving. And then you'll receive fair market value when they vest. So let's say it's a 4-year vesting period, you'll get 25% over each year. 5, I think, is the most that I've seen. Higher bonus percentage if it's applicable, flexible schedule, which everybody now has a flexible schedule because of COVID. Tuition assistance, that's a thing. If you're going back to school, or if you're thinking about going back to school, or you want to get a big expensive certification and you want them to pay for it, you can use that as well. Transportation costs, if you are, let's say it costs you $12 a day to take the metro, and then you times that by the month, that's $360. And then before you know it, by the end of the year, you're over $4,000 that you just lost on metro costs. Most companies have some kind of repayment plan for this, but if it's not enough, you can always ask for more, especially given your current situation.
I'd definitely like to take a minute and talk about those bullet points there. Turn this down, I'm feedbacking. That's one of the things that I think we could do a lot better on, as at least myself personally and as a community, is more. Those are the items that go into a compensation package that are very easy to forget, because you're so focused on just what your hourly rate and what your actual pay is going to be, that you forget about all those other important aspects. For example, I took a job with a contractor, so long story, I'm my parents' caregiver. I've got my wife's pregnant right now. I've got to tend to medical needs within my family. I didn't realize, because prior to that, I was actually working for the government. I didn't realize that it was not uncommon or even standard for private companies to not award or not provide sick days. So I just signed on with this company. Great company. I have nothing bad to say about them. This is all just kind of factoring into why scales like these are important. Had I known that, I wasn't going to have sick days, and I was only going to have 1 week of vacation, I definitely would have come back and negotiated something more, saying, given my current situation, I can't rely on just vacation days to take care of my family for sick days. So kind of knowing how each one of those elements that Erica just kind of briefed, I think is crucial, so that because for me, at least personally, those elements that she just talked on are, in many cases, even more important than the actual salary I'm taking home,
No, I absolutely agree. And people forget about it because they're only focused on, the amount that's going to be in their paycheck at the end of the day. But sometimes those benefits are actually worth more than, dollars and cents after taxes. Towards the end of the pre-hire negotiation, continue to bring the conversation back to the work that you'll do for the company. Keep your problems or whatever you have out of negotiation and circle back to your strengths and the experience which you provided, and the tools that were necessary to get you where you ended up. And if everything goes well at the end, the other side will be heavily invested in you to say, hey, this is not going to work out. Because sometimes employment negotiation can be exhausting. One of the other things I wanted to touch on was how your clearance can make a big difference. So this is the DC Metro versus the rest of the US. I actually got this from the Clearance Jobs 2020 compensation report. I have a copy of it if anybody would like one. But so the percentage of compensation above base pay was actually lower in the DC Metro than the national average, which surprised me. But the base salaries were higher. So the DC Metro was 9% and the rest of the US was 12% above base compensation. Is that large enough to where everybody can see the dollar amounts and the scale?
Yes.
Okay. And then number 2 was total compensation by clearance. So the Intel community continues to pay the most. It was actually $50,000 more than the lowest clearance level, but you can see how much your salary increases by the bigger clearance you have. And that's actually a question that I get a lot, is how much of a difference does my clearance make? I am on a contract that requires 9 hours a day versus 8 hours. So I asked for a salary to compensate for additional 5 hours, as well as to include monthly DC parking. From Stephanie. So how did that pan out with the employer once you asked for additional compensation? I assume you received it? Luis, is there a lag in our chat?
No, they can the chat. So there's no lag from with the chat. So so Stephanie, as she kind of tapped that in and typed that in, and we're responding to her, she's hearing us real time.
Okay.
Yep. So I guess to the benefit of everyone, we'll read it a little louder. So she's on a contract that requires 9 hours a day by 8 hours. So she asked for a salary to compensate for the additional 5 hours a week, as well as include monthly DC parking. So I think Steph was just making
awesome.
Yep, she received it. So she received that additional compensation. And that's again to that point, where it's like, you've got to be careful of just focusing in on just what your hourly rate is. There's so many other things that will just chew you up, parking, transportation, that you could ask for a little bump there or additional compensation for those items. So Ramsey asked, if you ask over what the limit is, will they tell you or will they end the conversation and not tell you?
So over the limit towards the end, the second to last slide will actually get into that. It depends on who you're talking to. If it's a staffing recruiter, they will always tell you because they don't want to lose you as a candidate because that's their commission. If it's talent acquisition, it depends on who you're dealing with. That one's kind of a toss-up. Sometimes they'll say, that's $5K over where you need to be, where we really want to be, and they'll negotiate with you. It depends on how far over you are. A hiring manager, that depends also. They usually like to let talent acquisition do all of that, just so that way they don't get into like an HR shitstorm for saying something that they're not supposed to. But it depends. The second to last slide will actually, as of October 1st of 2020, changes that.
All right. So stay tuned in there, Ramsey.
And then if I could add something really quickly on the clearance piece, I wouldn't say I got burned by this, but just know what the additional requirements are related to, for example, getting a clearance bonus when you sign on to a company. So that can be, a certain number of billable hours or something like that. I would just be very clear on what that takes to make sure that you can meet that. Because for me, at least, there was a lag in terms of when I actually got that bonus.
And that's actually a good point. I'm glad you mentioned that because I thought about that earlier. Most companies around August or September, if they do offer an annual bonus, have a cutoff date for when you're actually able to receive that. And there was actually a Naval Academy alumni that I argued this for based on a technicality with the client. So their cutoff for that day was on a Saturday for when the candidate was no longer able to receive. It just happened to fall on a Saturday for when the candidate was no longer able to receive the bonus for that year. Well, the candidate started on that Monday. So I brought it up to him. I was like, you can argue that to HR. He's like, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I was like, no, you need to argue that because that day fell on a Saturday. So you need to ask to make sure you get that additional 12 to 15% of your base salary because that's a good chunk of change. So it's always, and you can ask talent acquisition or the recruiter any of those questions. If it's getting to be around that time, when's your bonus percentage cut off? Or when is the cutoff for the bonus? And if they don't know, then they'll find out. And then if you are past that date and you know that your current company is going to offer you a bonus and you're going to miss out on that, you can actually ask for the sign-on bonus ahead of time. And I've done that a couple of times for people. And they'll usually ask, like, how much are you going to be losing out on? And sometimes they'll get creative with whether RSUs or additional PTO to make sure that you're even. Does that help?
Yeah. Did that answer your question, Ramsey?
So this slide shows that DoD actually makes up for more than 95% of the cleared population and the majority of respondents to the clearance job survey. Awesome. The CIA actually only accounted for 1% of the respondents, but they brought in the most money, and DOE was somewhere in the middle. So it was I found this part interesting as far as what agency pays the most. Now,
would you imagine though that, because I think CIA, I'd imagine that they're also accounting probably for a higher share of the higher clearances. Because when I worked for DHS briefly and I needed TSSCI, which I didn't really need a TSSCI, but I needed TSSCI to be in the building. But other than that, I would imagine that probably the CIA is probably commanding or the higher average because they probably have a preponderance of people with TSSCI with polygraph or something.
Yeah, so it's actually It's interesting when you get into clearance, and I see this a lot depending on what client I'm working with and who their customer is. So NSA will not take a poly from anyone. I hired a candidate who came from NRO and had a full scope poly with NRO, and NSA had to redo his poly because they considered it their version of a CI. CIA will take one from NRO and NSA. FBI will take one from no one. Every agency kind of does it differently. DOE uses Q and L clearances. Department of Homeland Security kind of has their own system similar to DOE. Some people are, DOD is obviously going to be in JPass, and the IC is obviously going to be in scattered castles. So it causes some turmoil because you're like, oh, well, I've got a full scope poly, I can go anywhere. Well, it depends on who holds it.
Got it. Yeah. And I can attest to that. When I left active duty to go work for DHS, I had just gotten my TSSCI with the Marine Corps re-adjudicated in December. That was 2012. And I still had to wait until June of 2013 to start with DHS, because they had to they did the full investigation again and had it adjudicated by whomever DHS has adjudicated their stuff. So it's important to know that, timeline for, it's a little beyond the salary negotiation, but just talking on just switching jobs and taking on different roles, that can hinder your timeline, knowing that not all clearances transfer to all agencies.
Mm-hmm. And again, if anybody wants a copy of the clearance jobs compensation report, I'm happy to provide it. So setting yourself up and asking for a raise once you've already been hired, obviously taking on more responsibility beforehand and demonstrating that you're able to handle it. Sharing your goals and visions and asking for feedback. So you could say something along the lines of, well, my first priority is to succeed in this company. My longer term goal is to advance, and I want to ensure that I'm setting myself up for success. So you can ask your supervisor or whoever you're doing your annual performance review with, you can ask for recommendations on how to improve and explain how you plan to contribute in the future, usually over the next performance period of a year. Don't be pushy or self-serving, which, most people will say, I need this, and here's what I've done for the company, and not why you deserve it. So people use what's going on in their day-to-day lives too often to explain why they need a raise instead of focusing on performance. And then, talk about the money that you've saved the company, whether or not you've delivered projects earlier on time, especially for project or program managers. Any metrics that you can share as far as what you've done, or even if you can turn them into metrics. Sharing your wins early and letting your supervisor or your boss or director, whoever it is that's doing your review, frequently, as far as, even if it's like a mini win, rather than sharing them all at once during a review time, because at some point, some of those little ones that you could share along the way might actually be obsolete. And then any relevant classes or certifications that you've taken throughout the year, that can definitely help, especially if you're gearing towards a promotion, things like the PMP from what we talked about last time. Practice and anticipate each outcome. It's kind of strange and unnatural for most people, but things will always go smoother if you can pre-calculate each response and anticipate, what if this happens? What if that happens? How do I rebut this, and kind of write everything down? Study, so salary trends and the metro area that you're in, but payscale.com, Glassdoor, salary.com, they don't account for a lot of the factors like your clearance, your seniority, the company size, the location that you're in. And you can also take into account the salary cap for the company. And again, that's on the next slide. But asking for a precise number. So the average raise is 1 to 5%. 1 if you suck, 5 if you're amazing. If you want 120K, but you think that you're going to get a rebuttal at 115K, just go ahead and ask for the 117.5 right off the bat to get everything out of the way. And then being prepared to hear no. If that does happen, you can actually request an interim performance appraisal or professional development opportunities in the meantime, which could put you in line for a possible increase sooner. So can we circle back in 6 months and, ask for some deliverables in the meantime, just to show that you really do want this and you're trying and you're not just going to give up and start looking for a job because you heard no. Do you want me to move on to the next slide, or does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'll start a conversation on that. So, you just mentioned that a lot of the popular sources that people are going to get salary information, like the Glassdoors and the salaries, and I don't remember what the third one is right now. But if that's not where to go to find that, and it's understandable, right? Because how many places in our country have the preponderance of just cleared personnel that the greater DC area has? Where do we go to figure out, hey, what's a fair salary for me?
So if you're talking from a cleared perspective, Clearance Jobs has a great resource for that. There's other employee-based sites where you can find people who've actually worked for the company recently and have posted what they've made and what their specific job title was, what their metro area is. Typically, California, DC, New York, and New Jersey all have their own pay. I was looking for an embedded software developer recently in San Diego, and I was shocked at how much people were asking for. I mean, it floored me. People were like, "Oh, I'm not going to make a move unless I hit 400." And I was like, "What? Seriously?" Wow. And I thought this guy was crazy until I started talking to more and more people, and they were like, "Yeah, it's got to be at least 350 in order for me to make a move because the cap is so high there and it's so expensive to live. A 1-bedroom is $4,500."
Yeah.
So it makes sense, but there's other sites that are more employee based and not, hey, we took a survey and this is what we came back with.
And when you're saying a salary cap, is that a cap that these companies are uncovering by way of market research? So is it a standard across, let's say that is there a salary cap for program managers in the DC area, or is that salary cap company by company that they determine on their own?
It's across the area. And sometimes that data is old. It might be from a salary that someone made 3 years ago and doesn't account for, cost of living, or maybe a change in pay structure or a change in pay levels.
Okay.
So salary history bands, going back to what the question that Ramsey asked earlier. So right now there are 19 statewide bans and 21 local bans, with additional states attempting to pass laws right now. Maryland effective October 1st of 2020. So employers may not seek pay history, but applicants can confirm pay history voluntarily post-employment or after an initial offer is made. And also upon request, employers provide an applicant the wage range of the position of which the applicant applied. So some state laws don't just ban pay history questions. A few of them have prevented employers from relying on candidates' pay history if you've discovered it or disclosed it post-offer, and also prevents them from taking disciplinary actions against employees for discussing their pay with coworkers. Virginia right now, it only applies to state agencies as far as a streamlined application, which eliminates salary history, school name, age indicator, and anything which offers an unconscious bias. I always tell people anyway on your resume, eliminate what year you graduated from college and don't go too far back on your resume history. That could give anyone the opportunity to do backwards math. And DC, obviously being the front runner in this, 3 years ago already put in laws saying that you can't ask candidates their salary history unless it's brought up unless the candidate offers it themselves.
Can you expand on that, Erica, on what you said there, that you ask people not to place their graduating year and to, I guess, what does a resume look like then after that? Because, we're all, at least I am used to creating a resume that's chronological and has each, one of my jobs by year. So you can easily tell that I've got about 20 years experience,
So if you graduated, let's say, class of 85 or class of 2001, you can go back 10, 12 years and be safe. If you graduated in the 80s or the 90s, going back to 2000 is safe without having an employer or talent acquisition or staffing agency look at that resume and go, okay, how many years do we have until they're going to officially retire or collect Social Security, and then, and then we're going to lose them? Because there are people who say, I just need 3 years and then I'm going to retire. Well, from a company perspective, the amount that they vest in you for training and improvement and any certifications that you take, for them, it's a waste. Even though for you, you're like, but I've got 3 good years, which is longer than some employees give companies nowadays. But if they know that right off the bat, then they're more than likely to pass over you.
Okay. And Ray just asked us, so how far back then in years on your resume history? And he goes, yikes, I've got 10 years of jobs listed. And isn't that age discrimination?
10 years of jobs is fine. Age discrimination, yes, while it's illegal to let the candidate know, it happens behind the scenes all the time, especially with staffing agencies, because employers can't get in trouble for it if they tell a staffing agency that, or if they tell talent acquisition that, because it's not coming straight from that particular employer. So it's really hard to pinpoint. I actually had a client last year implement a diversity and inclusion program, and they were looking for a female developer because they came out with this company policy saying that each department had to have 1 female. So he was like, I'm not supposed to say this, but if you send me a female applicant, I'm supposed to take her over a male applicant. So stuff like that happens all the time. Or I've sent resumes into hiring managers and they'll flat out say to me on the phone, like, how many years do you think I have? Or it looks like they're going to retire soon. And I can't say anything. I'm like, I literally can't ask someone like, hey, you're going to retire soon, right? But it's just something that goes through their mind.
Yeah.
Do these factors apply to federal service? The only time that I've ever actually seen that apply to federal service was someone who used to be a GS-13. She had 18 years in, was previously working for the USDA. Her position was being eliminated, and they gave her an option and said, you either have to move to St. Louis, Missouri, or we're ending your federal service. She's like, I've got a family, I can't move. So they ended her federal service. She had that 2 years left until she hit, permanent federal benefits. And there wasn't a federal agency out there that would pick her up, knowing that when she hit her 20 years, she was probably going to be out.
Wow. I hadn't heard something like that. So that was an actual GS employee, Erica?
That was an actual GS employee.
Okay.
One of the few times that I've seen that happen, because typically most feds make it their full 20 years. But that was the only instance, because everybody looked at her resume and said, you've got 2 years left before you get your federal benefits permanently. And then Ray said, so remove the year off all academic degrees then. I would remove them. I mean, I'm only 34 and I remove all of my years. Just because, it works the opposite way also. If you're too young, they're going to assume that you don't know what you're talking about. And if you're too old, then they're going to assume that you're just biding your time until you retire.
Right. Piggybacking off of Ramsey's question, USA Jobs generated resume is a chronological format. So yeah, and I guess, I'll tackle a couple of these with you, Erica. So a couple questions coming in right now. Ray, Ramsey are talking on now federal positions. So the way
that's fine.
Yeah. So the way USA Jobs work and the way I've applied to, so I've held 2 positions with the government, one with DHS and one with NASA. I was a GS-14 with DHS and a GS-13 paid as a GS-14 with NASA. Just because I took a step down, but I was a GS-13 step 8 so that they matched my GS-14 pay. For both those positions, I guess for all the positions that I've become accustomed to applying for federal positions, the federal resume in no way looks like a private resume. I don't know. It's more for those of you that haven't applied for federal jobs. There is no limitation on a federal resume to how long it can be. So my corporate resume is 2 pages long. My federal resume is 7 pages long. It has absolutely everything detailed out. I think, point being, the USA Jobs resume could be a monster for older alums. Yes, Ray, it can be. And this is kind of my opinion on this, on tackling this federal job thing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Erica. So with a corporate job, they're trying to figure out if you're qualified. With a federal job, they're trying to figure out why you're not qualified. So the number of applications that we have here, I did a little bit of pseudo HR for a DHS. I was in a business office when I was working there. The number of applications that come for any federal position is absolutely overwhelming. So for several rounds, you're just trying to survive a computer. So I think that's where we're safer with a longer resume, because if you don't have all the keywords and everything that needs to be there, you're just not going to survive the computer, right? I know that exists to a certain extent on the private side. I haven't run headfirst into that. I've had 2 corporate positions, and I haven't, at least my experience with those 2 positions, I did a lot of applications. I don't know if that happened in those other applications, but at least with the ones that I accepted, it didn't appear that was as much of a factor. What do you think on that, Eric?
I'm not sure on the federal side how they run their searches. On the private side, it's called a Boolean search, which is, you connect ands when it's a necessary, and then ors are in parentheses as far as like nice to have. So let's use like containerization for a second. If you're looking at it from an IT perspective, you have Docker, Kubernetes, or OpenShift. So those would all be in a parentheses for or, and on a resume, it would show up if you have any one of those 3. If you're looking for somebody who has, a PMP or relatable certifications, you would put all that in a parentheses and it would all show up. Somebody whose resume doesn't have those keywords but can actually do the job isn't going to show up on a search. I assume that when you're talking about facing the computer, that there's probably some algorithm on USA Jobs where if you don't have certain keywords, you're just going to fall into the wayside. And obviously, USA Jobs is also a little bit jaded with the way that they manage it. It kind of runs as more of like an if-then statement with preference. So, active duty first, then veterans, then military spouses, then, disabilities. And then if you're left over at the end, then you might be like 9th down in priority.
Mm-hmm. And, an interesting thing on that though, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because it's not salary within the salary realm, but it's still within the job realm, is the algorithm is so questionable within USA Jobs that I can tell you that I've applied. So as veterans, we can apply to both announcements. So if I did this when I was at DHS, we kind of set these things up. HR would release them, but certain jobs have to be. I don't know the HR behind it. They have a reason as to why they've got to handle certain positions certain ways, but certain positions are announced. The announcements are released two ways: one for all U.S. citizens, and then another one for a merit-based application. And for veterans, all of us with at least 3 years of service, which is all of us, on this call right now, we can apply to both those announcements. We can apply to the all U.S. citizens, and we can apply to the merit-based promotion. For a regular GS employee, they actually need several years of experience before they're eligible to even apply for that one. That's to enter the competitive service. So I can tell you from hundreds of applications. So the first rounds of my applications into the federal government, I tracked them all. I made 380 applications. I was interviewing several times a week, and I got several offers. But through that process, I was referred, meaning the computer said I was okay for a position, and I would get referred for one and not the other. So I would get not referred for the veteran one, but then get referred for the civilian one, and vice versa. So don't try to figure out that algorithm. Sorry?
Oh, no, sorry. There might have been a delay. There might have been different recruiters handling those positions, even though they seemed like similar requisitions. It all depends on the USA Jobs structure. So there's two different kinds of positions on USA Jobs. There's the types where they're genuinely looking for applicants because they don't have any. And in that case, it would function like a corporate structure where they're looking for the most qualified people. Then there's other ones where it's kind of like a good old boy system. Yeah. So I'll tell you a story. So a friend of mine works for the State Department, and he was telling me that because of how the government's so messed up with how they manage their recs, they actually knew the candidate that they wanted to apply, but had to get it through the recruiter first, but couldn't tell the recruiter that this was the candidate that they wanted to apply. They opened up 4 requisitions on USA Jobs and just kept opening and closing them because their candidate didn't actually make it through, until they finally went to the HR coordinator and said, why hasn't this resume made it through? And they opened up a 5th requisition. The candidate got passed through, made it through the interview stage, obviously, and they ended up hiring them. But that rec, even though it looked like it was open to everyone, was specifically geared for that person. Yeah. And that happens a lot on USA Jobs.
Yeah. I think a lot of us been around the government for a bit. We've sadly bared witness to some of those shenanigans. But I'm sorry, back to salary history. To smoothly bring us back, right? I can say I've been asked for my salary history, and it's always on the federal resumes, but I didn't know any about this until I spoke with Erica leading into this, that there were actually laws out there, restricting what employers can ask for when you're going through the application process and to negotiate your salary.
So Ramsey had actually had a question earlier that I didn't respond to. If applying to USA Jobs removes salary history can be on applications, but it's never an asterisk for you completing the application. They just want to know. And if you offer it voluntarily, and if it's a state, like I looked up West Virginia, they have no laws about it. So West Virginia can still discriminate you against salary. So if you're, let's say you left your last position and you're making $90,000, but your market value is 110, but you don't know your market value. In West Virginia, they can still offer you 98, knowing that you're way under, and ask you about what you made in your last company and not violate any laws. So to answer your question, you can remove your salary history, and you can't be discriminated for it, especially with the state that you're in.
Awesome.
And I think that was it. Any questions, comments? If you loved it, hate it, you can find me on LinkedIn and shoot me a message, or I can send you my email and type everything in the comments.
Yeah. So be sure to reach out to Erica, y'all. I mean, like I said, she's been an absolute phenomenal resource for us. I mean, she's been ridiculously helpful. I mean, last spring, actually, I remember because Ingrid and I are classmates, but I didn't meet Ingrid until spring of this year. And we were talking, and a couple of us were together, and a couple were transitioning. We were doing. It was a social function with the chapter out at Valor Brew Pub, and a couple of the grads were like, "Yeah, we're transitioning. We need to just find what opportunities are available out there." They didn't know how to navigate this sort of stuff, but I remember on the spot we were pulled out our phones, and I started LinkedIn messaging Erica, and by the end of that month, we had somebody already working at Amazon. So I mean, it's a beautiful thing. Let's see. Patricia.
It's a small world. Yeah, Zane Stickle, another Academy graduate. That was awesome.
I referred Zane to Chris Spiroff, who got him hired at Amazon.
Yeah. So Patricia, so welcome. So we are thank you. Yep. So names again. So I'm chapter president Luis Martinez, class of 01. We've got Ingrid Peterson, class of 01, and we've got Erica Schreiner here tonight. Awesome. Thanks, Ray. Appreciate that. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Beth. And thanks, Patricia. Does anyone have any questions? Or did you want to present anything else, Erica? I mean, we can have a conversation here for another 30 minutes, or, to kind of expand on anything, or, we can call it however you'd like.
No, I don't think so, unless anyone has any additional questions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate you showing up. Patricia, thanks again.
I messaged Brandon earlier. I was like, you can't pick on me.
Kwame, great. Thanks. Appreciate you enjoyed it, man. All right, guys. So for the next session, Erica will be back with us, and Ingrid will be with us as well. We'll be talking on networking to address that third need that you've all said, and how to network effectively. I've been told recruiters are motivated to place as quickly as possible. I can see that, Patricia. Would you agree, Erica?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially staffing recruiters, because like we said before, they are motivated because of their commission, and the more money they get you, the more money they make.
Yep. So if any of y'all need, go on and shoot us an email, and I'll reach over and type this on my laptop here in a second, but contact us at usnagwc.org and let us know anything, any feedback you have, or any sessions that you'd like for us to put together. Like I said, right now, 3 of us again are going to be back together on November 11th for a networking session. We'll talk about how to effectively network and build up your Rolodex. I was told that I shouldn't use that because some people don't know what a Rolodex is. But if you don't know what a Rolodex is, how to have more LinkedIn connections, how to have more people that you can reach out to.
Kwame had one question.
How do you really know how much you are worth?
That's a loaded question. So it depends on education, for one. That matters to some companies, not all, but nowadays bachelor's, master's, PhD can still get you more. It also depends upon the skill set, how common or how rare it is. Nowadays, back 6 or 7 years ago, when cyber became really huge, everybody went out and got a certified ethical hacker certification. And now you can throw a rock and hit one, and cybersecurity salaries have actually gone way down because of that. So, which goes back to the scarcity model as far as what types of skill what types of skill sets you have, what you bring to the table, what certifications you have, and even the companies that you've worked in, because sometimes large enterprise experience can make a big difference, or sometimes it can really hurt you, which is why what you have should factor, or what you can bring to the table should factor into the type of company that you're seeking for your next position. Because if you only have small business experience, like me, sometimes big companies will look at that and be like, okay, she's going to drown in this big pond. Versus if you've always worked at companies like Northrop or Booz Allen Hamilton or, Lockheed, they'll see that as an asset because you're used to working in a matrix environment, dealing with people across, multiple platforms.
And I guess the way I'd approach it as, not someone in the profession, but for me, Kwame, like in the profession that Eric is in, is so I'm a PMP. That's the session we had last week, and we kind of touched in on a couple of those things. As a PMP, I think the national average for a certified PMP is 110,000. So I take that to be, pretty much a good gospel starting number for this area, because we are paid higher than most of the nation. So I usually start there. And then it's just also, then I start looking at what my peers are earning. And the nice thing about being military, is that, and Erica kind of pointed this out to to me earlier, is we're not shy about talking about our salaries, right? So even after we get out, we still talk about our salaries as if it's no big deal, which is a big no-no for someone who's been a civilian their whole life, But I just ask, what my buddies are doing, because birds of a feather, right? So I imagine you professionally, what did you do in? Are you out? Are you still in, Kwame? Or yeah, I don't think any of us are shy about sharing our salary. And aside from just being able to look up our salaries when we were active duty, it was just something that we just, I guess, retain as we come out. Okay, you're out, Kwame. So, just going up to other vets in your career field, I know what we're doing here in the chapter is make sure you have that network that you can reach out to us and kind of engage other people within here to kind of get the feel for it. But ultimately, I guess what I am today is I won't, and this is going to sound arrogant because it probably is, but I won't get out of bed for any job that's going to interview me for less than 120K. Like I won't waste my time. Like that goes by way of knowing, my peers, knowing how much my certification on average is earning, know how much my certification is being earned around here, knowing what, all the things that Erica just mentioned, what my clearances are. I know I've got, I've got a secret clearance. I've had a TSSCI. I can get one back again. Just the company has to pay for it. So knowing just all those elements, you can kind of know, okay, well, if 110 is the average and that's good for, pretty much this whole area for a PMP, that's just like Erica said, not factoring for clearances or anything. I'd throw on another 10, 15K on top of that and then kind of take it from there, especially for someone with almost 20 years experience, right? So I would say, well, that's my approach to kind of figure out how much I'm worth, right? Did that answer your question?
It's funny you should actually say that about military people being really comfortable talking about how much they make, because it's, it's so common and you can look it up. There's actually a position that I'm looking for right now for a technical program management position focused on optical. What their pay band has a $60,000 span as far as what they're willing to accept from candidates. And it's because of the level of years of experience. And one of those things that I found interesting on the clearance jobs report was total compensation based on seniority. People at entry level, early level, mid-level, senior, and then, you get into executive and senior executive, like C-level. So, yes, they do. Clearance jobs has great FAQ pages for that. And they regularly published reports. A lot of people look at regular like Forbes or Business Insider, but from a military perspective, they're looking at it to cater to civilians, not necessarily to people who already have clearances. But going back to my point, it's really uncommon for civilians to actually discuss what they're making, and it actually makes some people really squeamish, especially when you get into the private sector, because you can have 4 people all doing the same jobs and their pay could be $40,000 apart, but nobody knows it because everybody's doing the same job and nobody talks about it. Sometimes companies will give you, that senior level title because just to get you up to that next step. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're senior. It just means that you asked for so much money and they gave it to you that now in order to get you up to that next pay band, they have to give you a senior level title. So it depends, but yeah, it's really uncommon. And at my last position, it's funny that you should say that, because I had one coworker who was like unusually blunt, who sat next to me. He was like, "Hey, when you negotiated your base pay, what did you get?" And I was like, "Oh my God, nobody ever asks you that." And he was like, "No, I got this." He's like, "I don't think it's a big deal. Like, why don't you just tell me?" And at first I was really put off. And then we finally disclosed it to each other. And he was like, "How did you get that much?" I was like, "I asked." And he was like, "Oh shit." And then we realized that we were far off from each other. And he was like, because it was a sales position, so they gave that to me for a year. And he was like, "Well, I only got 9 months, so that way you can ramp up and meet your quotas and eventually get to a point where your commission is over what you had negotiated." But he was like, "Damn." And then he went to somebody else who got hired like 2 months ago. And he was like, "Hey, what did they give you?" And I'm like, "I don't know if you're supposed to do that." But I guess for military people, it's really common.
Yes, Ray. Thank you. Got a question from Patricia there, Erica.
But don't companies run a serious risk of losing people if they realize there are major pay discrepancies among their employees? They could. Actually, I saw a Facebook post from a coworker of mine talking about, because she's a teacher. She's like, "I think every teacher should talk about how much their pay is." And I'm like, "Well, you're forgetting that some states give you 10 years to get a master's. Education can make a big difference as far as what you're offered, your seniority level, what certifications you have, all of that factors in." But people get offended when you have people who are making drastic differences in their compensation all within the same company doing the exact same job. Because obviously that company needs a justification for paying you more money. But they forget to take into account that you may only have 3 years of experience, but the person next to you has 15 years of experience, and that's why they're making more. So there's been, especially among the private sector recently, there's been this big campaign to have everyone make the same amount of money for doing the same job, but not everybody is equally qualified, and people tend to glaze over that aspect. And while I don't necessarily always think that education begets intelligence, because we've all met the super educated people that couldn't think themselves outside of a box, that it does generally tend to swing that way.
And Ray and Patricia echoes the points. Human, yes, that's a great way to kind of summarize what I said. Human, yeah, human intelligence. That is the way to get the info you need. That's what that guy did with you, Erica. It just can't beat human. You gotta be bold. You gotta have the brass ones to ask the question.
I mean, my colleague was like, "Dude, I'm not telling you." And he was like, "Why not? It's not a big deal." He was like, "We're all doing the same thing. Just tell me what your offer letter was."
Yeah.
Oh.
Awesome.
Thanks, Kwame.
All right, y'all. Okay. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Looks like we're wrapping up here. So again, we'll have Erica and Grid together again for the networking. Same topic, same format, but we'll be talking about how to build your again, I want to say Rolodex, but I think all of us here are old enough to know what a Rolodex is. So how to build that and how to have a functional network so that things like what happened to Chris, I can't remember what his name was. You just mentioned that I said we all met at Valor, but just so that you know how to build a healthy network that works for you and helps propel you both professionally, socially, and every other way. So go on to usnagwc.org. You should start seeing that invite coming out, I think, by tomorrow. And just start registering for that, guys. We appreciate you so much taking the time to be here with us tonight. Thank you for all the great questions and all your engagement. Thanks for taking those polls. It gives us a good feel as to what where the membership stands. One more comment came in. One more point for us older retired types that get a retirement paycheck. You can ask for slightly less than the market, leveraging your pension so you get the offer over the other folks. Yep. I'd say to that though, Ray, is that's cool if you want the job, but also don't sell yourself short either, because sometimes companies come back at you trying to go, well, you're already getting pensions and we're not going to pay you that much, which I'll never be in that position because I'm in the reserves, but and it is probably I have this attitude because I am out, is I'll say, no, you're going to pay me what I'm worth. Pension, that's something separate, but that is a valid point. That is a valid point though, Ray. If you're comfortable with going under market, regardless of what the reason is, then go for it. No judgment from me. But okay. Anything else from the ladies? Erica, Ingrid?
No, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
ditto, thanks.
Yep. All right. Have a great evening.
See you next time.
See you
Bye.
next time.